This stuff is completely unnecessary, and the private sector would never, ever invest money in stupid things like giving puppies heart attacks and putting them on treadmills, like the government has been and continues to pay for, literally.
34 years of forcing high blood pressure medication into dogs and making them run on treadmills until their hearts burst.
Yeah.
Welcome back to Going Rogue with Lara Logan, the podcast that will get you going for sure. This one is something else. My guest today is Justin Goodman from the White Coat Waste organization. That's basically a watchdog on federal, who keeps track of federal spending on animal experiments.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't even believe it when I say that word.
Testing, experiments.
Experiments. Everything that we do to animals in the name of science that we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, and you are the senior vice president of White Coat Waste.
Yeah.
And Justin, I gotta say, this was a tough one for me. I mean, getting ready for this interview, from the moment I heard you testify on the Hill, it was a Sunday morning, I was in my kitchen, and I was listening to this, and I was like, you gotta be kidding me. And I couldn't stop listening because I was so horrified. This one, it'll make you cry, it'll make you angry, it'll break your heart, and it frustrates me that this is still going on. And I think this is a really important opportunity to take a good look at the work that you've been doing and what is being done without tax dollars, which is, I mean, how would you describe it?
It's taxpayer-funded torture.
Of animals.
And if you did it outside of a laboratory, you'd end up in prison. People have been deported for abuse. People who were here illegally have been deported for doing things to animals that there are scientists being paid with our tax dollars to do, and promoted and rewarded and put in government halls of fame for doing cannibal experiments on kittens and butchering puppies and all other horrible abuses, in the quote unquote, in the name of science, that we're being forced to pay for, even though most people don't want it, don't need it, and are opposed to it.
Okay. Wow. It's like, you say the words cannibal experiments on kittens. And I know this is normal for you in a sense, because it's part of your everyday life. You spent 10 years at PETA. What does PETA stand for again? Like the crazy environmental people?
I was at PETA for a decade, learned a lot about, how to campaign, how not to. Mm-hmm. Took a lot of lessons from there. And
we'll talk about what happened to you and how that all came apart. But you went from there to White Coat Waste.
I helped launch White Coat Waste, yeah.
Right. And so really that's more than 20 years as a watchdog looking into this.
Yeah, and before I got my start early on in the early 2000s as a student at the University of Connecticut.
Lara Logan here with some news for you. Men's testosterone levels today are roughly half of what they were 50 years ago. And after the age of 30, testosterone drops around 1% every year. CHOQ's male vitality supplements may be the answer for you. They contain ingredients clinically proven to boost natural testosterone production. Go to CHOQ.com and use code TV to get a huge discount. Or call or text the number on your screen today. And that's when you discovered they were doing horrible things on campus, right?
Yeah, on monkeys. They had a monkey lab, and they were... I had never done activism or advocacy or an investigation or anything like that before. I was interested in animals. Like most people, I had an affinity for animals, but had never done anything about it. And my wife and I got to the University of Connecticut for college, for grad school, and someone had mentioned in passing that there was a monkey lab on campus, and I looked into it, and no one knew about it. There'd never been a campaign to stop it. No one really knew what was happening there, so I taught myself how to use the Freedom of Information Act and use all these different government databases, federal spending databases, database of scientific publications. And I started to put the pieces together and discovered that this lab that was being funded by the National Institutes of Health with our tax dollars at the time had gotten $1.7 million, was buying monkeys, locking them alone in cages, drilling into their skulls and destroying the parts of their brain that control their eye movements, and then implanting steel coils into their eyes. They would then lock them in these restraint devices, these custom-made restraint chairs, and force them to watch TV screens for hours at a time to track how badly the brain damage they inflicted damaged their eye movement. And the records I got from this laboratory showed that these monkeys had these horrible infections in the parts of their brains where they had their heads cut into and drilled into. And in one case, one of the monkeys, because he was uncooperative, obviously, they yanked him so hard by his neck that his eyes bled. And government inspectors, the university, this was all in the records, and no one had done anything about it. So I blew the whistle, and I released all these records to the press, to the university leadership, and we launched a campaign. We protested at the university. We protested in front of, there were weeks at a time where I would stand in front of the university president's office with signs and begging them to stop these experiments. And we did. Fast forward 2 years, they shut this laboratory down. They had to, for the first time in history, because me, some student, cared enough about these animals to do something about it, this laboratory had to return money to the NIH for violating the law. They were cited and fined by the USDA, and this guy has not touched an animal since then, and that was almost 20 years ago. So I was in a PhD program, finishing my master's, and I realized my heart was really in advocacy and activism and not in academia. Academia was too slow. Change happened too slowly. So that was about 20 years ago, and I've been fighting literally every day since then to get animals out of labs. Yeah, despite, that was 20 years ago, and you'd think maybe over the last 20 years things have changed, but yeah, I've shed a lot of tears over those monkeys. I've shed a lot of tears over there's still 120,000 monkeys in laboratories in the United States now. There's 100 million animals in laboratories in the US now. Monkeys, dogs, cats, bunnies, all kinds.
100 million?
100 million animals in laboratories. And we don't even know the exact number because nobody actually counts. The government doesn't require these laboratories to tell you how many animals are in there. So a lot of the job we do at White Coat Waste is simply, in addition to trying to shut down labs and save as many survivors as possible, is just basic accountability and transparency.
Yeah.
How is our money being spent? How many animals are you buying? Where are they? What are you doing to them? Because in most cases, we don't know. And people if you're on your social media feed, you might think that like cosmetics companies are the worst offender when it comes to animal testing.
No.
That hasn't been the case in a long time. Uncle Sam, the federal government, is the single largest funder of animal testing. The U.S. government is the single largest funder of animal testing, not only in the country, but in the entire world. We spend about $20 billion a year on animal testing in this country. Wow. And we fund laboratories both in the United States and hundreds of laboratories in foreign countries, China, Russia, Iran, and other places. Where there's no accountability and transparency at all about how money is being spent. And obviously, what happened in Wuhan is like the perfect example of the worst case scenario of government-funded animal testing gone wrong. Yeah, so a lot to be angry about, a lot to be sad about, but also a lot to be hopeful about. The first Trump administration made more progress, historic progress to end animal testing than ever, and they've really hit the ground running in the last 6 months to pick up where they left off. So we're optimistic, but there's a lot of work to be done. I mean, there's a lot of animals. There's close to 50,000 dogs suffering in labs in the U.S., something like 15,000 cats suffering in laboratories, and then millions and millions of other animals who are being burned and poisoned and amputated, and just all manner of abuses being inflicted on them with our tax dollars. And often in secrecy in laboratories that refuse to even tell us what they're doing with our money.
Okay, so what the obvious pushback against what you're saying is that, yes, it's terrible, but we have made this is necessary for us in science and in public health in the United States, that we need to do these experiments on animals, that it's the ugly truth that nobody wants to face, but you're all benefiting from it. And I was shocked to see that the benefits are not what we've been led to believe. Can you just explain to me, what do we gain from doing this?
The only people benefiting from animal experimentation are the people lining their pockets with the money that they get to do it. Animal experimentation is a failure and a fraud, and you can look at the NIH. which is the single largest funder of animal testing when it comes to the federal government. Out of one side of their mouth, they're saying, constantly lamenting the fact that animal testing is that it's ineffective, that over 90% of the drugs that pass animal tests fail in people because they don't work or they're dangerous.
Over 90%.
Because obviously what happens, the classic example is how chocolate is poisonous to dogs, right? But people, dogs die from chocolate, people die for chocolate. It's the same with, look at drugs. You can't put something into a dog or a monkey or a rabbit or a mouse and think that it's going to respond the same way as it does in people. And we've found time and again, the NIH admits this, the FDA admits this, it's actually a very bad way to predict how drugs and treatments are going to work in people.
Is to see how they work in animals.
Exactly, because their physiology and biology is wrong. They're incredibly stressed. If you have a monkey, the example of the Yukon monkeys, like you have these monkeys, they're not even like real monkeys. They're living under constant pain and stress in a laboratory cage by themselves. Nothing about their behavior or psychology or biology is natural at that point. So there's all these confounding variables in laboratories that make these experiments on animals completely useless when it comes to reliably predicting. You'd be better off flipping a coin.
Can you point to, is there any testing on animals? Is there anything that we've done that helped humans?
Well, here's the problem is the Food and Drug Administration, historically, and they're under the Trump administration, they're making some progress to change this, but they've forced companies to test on animals for decades. To close to 100 years, it's been a federal law that drug companies have to test drugs on animals before they go into human trials. So the industry will argue that every drug that has been approved by the FDA has been tested on animals and claim that that's evidence that animal tests were necessary. But that doesn't mean they were necessary. It just means that they were conducted because they were mandated, but it doesn't mean we could have gotten the same results or actually better results some other way if they were allowed the freedom to do that. So one of the things we've been working on is removing those mandates, those outdated animal testing mandates, and cutting this red tape that forced drug companies to literally poison beagles. The way you get a drug to market, you have to currently is tested in 2 species. Usually it's a mouse or a rat and a beagle or a monkey. But most often the non-rodent species is a beagle. And what they do is they buy or hire companies to buy dozens and dozens of beagle puppies and force tubes down their throats and just pump massive amounts of experimental drugs directly into their stomachs to see at what point the dogs become sick and die. And that tells you nothing about what that drug is going to do in humans, but for liability reasons, to check a box, that's become part of the drug approval process, even though it's actually not necessary. It's counterproductive. It's misleading because there's a lot of drugs that might be safe and effective for people that look like they're harmful in dogs and will never make it to market because the animal tests were misleading. So it's very counterproductive. It's very inefficient. It's very expensive. It's very slow.
Yeah.
And we're seeing innovation now, but we would see much more innovation now. And if you could remove those mandates, remove funding from animal testing, and those resources could be directed elsewhere. And we're seeing some positive movement in that direction, but the problem, it still exists.
The most important action that you can take today is to protect your family's future from cybercriminals and online predators. And the one app to do it is BUNKR. BUNKR is developed by experts with 25 years of experience catching criminals and fighting cybercrime. They created BUNKR to protect their own family, and now they're sharing it with you. So what do you get with a BUNKR family plan? Well, you get a private messenger to share messages and photos and files with your spouse and your children, and connecting only with people you approve of. No spam, no surveillance, and no imposters, ever. And you get a password manager to safeguard your family's online accounts, including financial, shopping, streaming, and social media. Plus, you get a vault that will securely store your family's wedding photos, baby pictures, special memories, financial information, IDs, birth certificates, passports, tax documents, wills, trusts, and insurance, basically everything that matters to you. So go to their website, bunker.life/Lara, that's BUNKR.life/Lara, and use code LARA, Lara, for 25% off your family plan today. I have to wonder about the psychology of a person shoving a tube down the throat of a beagle puppy and poisoning it. Can you really tell me that you can do that over and over again, no matter what people say about how necessary it is? What is the psychology of somebody who's able to do that, whether it's in the name of science or anything else? I mean, have you looked at that?
Well, certainly there are some animal experimenters who are just straight up sociopaths. The types of experiments they design, the way they respond. I mean, we have videos of a laboratory in the actual NIH headquarters outside of DC, in a laboratory that's been going on for close to half a century, where they give monkeys brain damage to destroy the fear part of their brain, the fear processing part of their brain. They lock them in cages, they chain them by the neck, and then they bring toy snakes and spiders, which the monkeys, like humans, are naturally scared of, and they take these brain-damaged monkeys and just present them over and over again with snakes and spiders to startle them and scare them and videotape it. And you see these monkeys cowering in the back corner of their cages. They're chained by the neck. They can't get away. And we have videos, and you can hear in the background people joking and laughing at the monkeys, saying, "Where's the dancing monkey?" and laughing at them as they suffer and cower in fear in these cages.
Where the hell's the dancing monkey?
Now, so I think certainly, yeah, there are some animal experimenters who are sociopathic, but I think part of this is a symptom of kind of how science has gone so wrong, because there's no child out there who says, I want to be a doctor or a scientist when I grow up, and is excited to like decapitate mice on the weekend, which is how they kill mice in laboratories. They use guillotines and chop their heads off.
Why?
Because it's quick and it's quick and easy.
Why do they need to kill them? To dissect them?
Yeah, because virtually every single animal who's in a laboratory is not coming out alive. Whether it's a dog or a monkey or a cat or a rabbit or a mouse or a rat, they're all going to be killed in laboratories. Either they're going to die as a result of being poisoned or or infected with a virus, like Ebola. You know, they infect monkeys with Ebola and they just watch the disease progress until they're bleeding out and they die. So yeah, animals don't get out of the labs alive, but kids don't grow up thinking that's what I want to do. But what happens is the scientific institutions socialize them to become comfortable with this, right? So it starts with dissection when you're a kid, like get comfortable cutting up animals. Then you get to college, and if you want to be a researcher, a very common job for a low-level research assistant or a student researcher is euthanizing, killing mice on the weekend. You come into the laboratory and you get trained to guillotine mice. And then by the time it's your turn to go get a faculty job, they tell you, well, we're going to be experimenting on mice, and we have this grant for millions of dollars where you're going to infect mice with an HIV-like illness or Ebola or Lassa or some other incurable disease. And you've been socialized over many years to be comfortable with that and feel like, to your point, that this is a necessary evil. If I want to be a scientist, this is what I have to do.
And this is for the greater good.
Exactly. So you get brainwashed. And you actually have a lot of women who choose not to go into scientific careers because they're not comfortable with that. Young women who are like, I'm not going to go into science because this is what it's being presented to me as, a field where I'm going to have to torture and kill animals, and that's not something I want to do. This is actually how White Coat Waste was founded. Is my boss, the president and founder of White Coat Waste, Anthony Bellotti, was a teenager growing up outside of New York City, and he thought he wanted to go to medical school. So he got an internship at a hospital in New York City, shows up the first day, and it's an animal laboratory. And they were doing cardiac experiments on pigs, giving pigs heart attacks, and hoisting them up by the leg, getting them on the table. His job was to help get the pigs on this table ready for the experiment. So he's a teenager, 17 years old, horrified. Worked there for a few weeks and left. It's like, I don't want anything to, if this is what being a doctor or a scientist is, I don't want anything to do with this. So he went and worked in politics. He was like, I'm going to go amass a toolkit where I can figure out a way that maybe I can come back one day and fight this problem.
Yeah.
So he went into politics and ended up working on lots of defund campaigns, defund Planned Parenthood, anti-Obamacare, defund socialized medicine type stuff. And as he was working on those campaigns, a light bulb went off and he thought, oh, the government's the largest funder of animal testing. We could be using these same tactics to attack that problem, get the government out of the animal testing business, stop the people who I saw torturing animals from doing that, cut the money off, get them, cut the funding off, cut the problem off at the source. So he worked in politics, and then in the early 2010s started to think about what would a animal testing focus group look like that had this center-right conservative bent where the government was the problem. It wasn't the consumers that were a problem. It wasn't private industry. It was a problem. It's the government funding these experiments, forcing companies to conduct these experiments. So that's how White Coat Waste came to be, was someone who thought they wanted to be a scientist and was so disgusted by what science has become that he it pushed him in the opposite direction. He ended up founding an organization to reform the whole institution.
I feel like you'd be hard-pressed to find a taxpayer that said to you they want this done with their money.
Yeah, we do polling throughout the year, and people across the political spectrum.
Right, from any side, it doesn't matter.
They want nothing to do with this. They don't want their money spent on torturing animals in laboratories. And they know, people carry a supercomputer in their pocket these days. They know that the idea of sickening and torturing animals for science just seems totally archaic. And it is.
Of course. And what can you do instead of that? Like, what would be more effective? Because if more than 90% of the experiments on animals have no real human application, then what would be effective? What are the alternatives?
Yeah. So, RFK has been talking a lot about this. Marty McCary at FDA has been talking a lot about this. There's all these great technologies that have been developed that are based on actual human biology instead of mice, rats, dogs, monkeys, things like organs on a chip, which they build out of ethically sourced cells and tissues the size of your thumb. You can build a miniature human organ and test drugs in it, model diseases in it. And when you compare the results to animal tests, it's more accurate at predicting what's going to happen in people. Things like AI can screen thousands and thousands of compounds to see if they're going to work as a drug or if there's going to be toxicity to an environmental pollutant or a chemical way faster than animal tests. Animal tests take years and thousands of animals and millions of dollars, and computers can do it, in a matter of days or weeks. So the technology's out there. The problem is animal testing has become such big business that the resources have been disproportionately focused on animal testing. The NIH has a $48 billion budget. $48 billion budget. 40% of the grants they give out are for animal testing.
Are you serious? Almost half.
Nearly half of the grants the NIH awards are for animal testing.
That's insane.
Yeah, especially because the return on investment is so horrible. The NIH budget has basically doubled over the last 25 years, and people aren't healthier because of it. No. We don't have less diseases because of it.
No, they haven't cured cancer.
No, people are sicker than they were. There's more animals in laboratories suffering than there were before, and we're not getting anything because
the number is growing of animals in labs?
The number has been growing because spending by these agencies that are the driving force, the government is the market maker for animal testing. They fund it, they require it, they pay for pharmaceutical companies' animal tests to get drugs to market. They're paying, right now the NIH is paying the billionaire co-founder of Moderna to torture dogs in experiments for his new company for a new weight loss drug. The federal government, taxpayers, you and I are paying the billionaire co-founder of Moderna to do dog tests for a new weight loss drug that his new company is developing. So the government is behind it every step of the way. They're funding animal tests, they're requiring animal tests, and then they're requiring companies to do animal testing and then also paying for the animal tests that company is going to conduct. And of course, we're not going to see any of the benefits of that. We're not going to see if those drugs make it to market and make billions of dollars. Taxpayers aren't going to see that money.
No.
Individuals are going to see that.
So why are taxpayers funding it?
Because the whole system is broken and corrupt. Yes. Because it's totally bought, by colleges and universities control how the NIH is spending its money. Pharmaceutical companies control how the NIH is spending its money. Colleges and universities are the single largest recipient of grants from the NIH, and every grant they get whatever the dollar amount is, they're getting 50% sometimes, 100% sometimes on top of that just for administrative costs for the university as basically a slush fund.
And that's a big thing that Doge exposed, wasn't it? Was that how much of the funding is actually being spent on administrative costs, et cetera, et cetera?
Because Trump and Doge have said they're going to cap it at 15%. So if your grant's $1 million, you can only get $150,000 on top of that. Some of these grants that we've gotten through FOIA, they're getting 100% on top of the grant for things that have nothing to do with research, things that have nothing to do with helping the American public, but just benefit the administration and the leadership of these universities so they don't have to spend their endowments.
Yes, so they can amass their endowments and also pay these extraordinary salaries.
Yeah, and we're footing the bill and making sure that's possible. So the colleges and universities, that's where most of the animals are locked in labs in this country. And if you're a university administrator, you don't care if they're doing transgender animal experiments or butchering beagles or experiments with, aborted fetuses and putting it into mice and rats in laboratories, because where you see a dog, they see a dollar sign. And that's all they care about. So whenever we're working on Capitol Hill on something to restrict funding for animal testing, the first people who come out in force, even if they're not doing that type of specific research, are colleges and universities, because they see it as a slippery slope. They see it as we're going to come and attack their bottom line, and they don't want that.
We all have a lot of choices for cell phone service, and it feels like there are new ones that are popping up all the time. But for me, there's only one company that stands in the gap for every American that believes freedom is worth fighting for. And that company is Patriot Mobile. The good news is you can switch to Patriot Mobile today without sacrificing quality or service. And if you're worried about coverage, don't be. Patriot Mobile uses all three major U.S. networks. So if you have service in this country today, you'll have as good or better coverage with Patriot Mobile. And if you think switching is a hassle, it's not. You can keep your number, keep your phone, or upgrade if you want. Patriot Mobile has a team that is based in the U.S., will get you activated in minutes from the comfort of your own home. And if you're stuck in a contract or you owe money on your phones, don't worry. Patriot Mobile now has a contract buyout program. This is how we win, by aligning our spending with our values. Every dollar we spend matters. So go to patriotmobile.com/Lara or call 972-PATRIOT and use promo code LARA, that's LARA, just to get a free month of service. Switch today, that's patriotmobile.com/Lara or call 972-PATRIOT. Okay, so are there any colleges that are not doing animal testing?
There are probably colleges that don't do animal testing just because it's not part of what they do in general, but it's not, they haven't taken a stance against it, right? So like my wife works at a small liberal arts school outside of DC. They just don't have animal laboratories because they're a tiny school. They don't really get federal grants. So they don't have the infrastructure or interest in doing that. But I don't know of a single college or university across this country that says we are taking a stand and we are not going to do this because it's wrong and we're doing the right thing. Mostly they'll take money for whatever it is, no matter how horrible it is, and be totally grateful and brag about it and put press releases out about how they just got a new $10 million grant to expand their monkey labs or whatever the case is. So
it's amazing you grew up, dreaming of maybe going to an Ivy League school or something like that, revering Harvard and all these places. And now you discover that they're just awful on so many fronts. Who are the worst offenders?
We're interested in money, right? So we follow the money. If you look at who's getting the most money for animal experimentation, it's probably who you'd expect. Harvard, Johns Hopkins University, University of California schools, University of California, San Francisco is one of the top recipients of federal funding. And Harvard, Harvard was doing until recently these horrible transgender, creating transgender lab animals by taking mice and rats, giving them invasive surgeries and hormone therapies to mimic trans kids and trans adults, and then infecting them with diseases, wounding them, doing all kinds of horrible experiments on them. Harvard is currently just got its grant renewed to give THC to monkeys.
Wait.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay. I just want you to explain that to me again.
Oh, transgender mice?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're taking mice and rats, and they're doing what kind of invasive surgeries?
Yeah. So in December of 2024, so earlier, end of last year, we did an investigation showing how the NIH had given out dozens of grants for transgender animal experimentation, where they take mice and rats. In the case of the male animals, they castrate them, and then they give them female hormones to mimic trans female adults and kids. So in some cases, they're using adolescent animals and young animals to mimic kids, and in some cases, they're using adult animals to mimic trans adults. And then they do things like give them vaccines, infect them with HIV-like viruses. In one case, in one of these experiments in California, what they were doing was they were creating these transgender lab animals and then overdosing them with a popular party date rape drug that is used widely in the gay community to see if animals who were taking hormone therapies to mimic trans humans were more likely to overdose on this party drug, GHB, than animals who are not taking the hormone therapy.
Okay. This is the part where I say, who gives up rat's ass? That's polite compared to what I really want to say about whether or not, why do you need to be protected from that? How on earth does that benefit? Even if you're trans, does that really benefit anyone?
No, it doesn't, because the results of the experiments are completely irrelevant whether you're straight, gay, trans. It doesn't matter. Animal experiments aren't going to help you. But this won't surprise you or probably a lot of your view. I mean, a lot of the trans stuff happened mostly under the Biden administration, where they created new funding streams specifically for these DEI programs, new funding streams at NIH for grants specifically for these type of things, for gender diversity and stuff. And as a result of that, all of these animal experimenters started proposing these disturbing experiments to create transgender lab animals, and they did it with monkeys.
Because they knew they'd get the money for it.
Because they put the right keywords in, and then they start putting that this is relevant to transgender health, and then they put that in their grant abstract and application and keywords, and we get through FOIA the grant abstract, the applications that say over and over again that the reason this is important is because it's going to help transgender people. Now that those experiments have been exposed, and Trump at his State of the Union in March criticized this as an example of wasteful spending. He's mentioned in the Oval Office a few times. Doge has cut most of them. Thank God. We're very grateful for that. But now they're all in denial that these are transgender animal experiments. Now they're saying, we're just looking at the effects of hormone therapies.
Sure, yeah.
And it's like, that's not why you got the money. You got the money because you put the
right keyword in. And so this is what people really have no idea about, that when you see these political trends developing and it's all the buzz in the media, that there's layers and layers and layers behind all of this. Same thing with the climate, right? Same thing with the trans movement, that you can find these things are used for political reasons and funded by the taxpayer in ways that most of the time we have no idea about.
Yeah, with the first Trump administration back in 2019, we worked with Trump's EPA chief, Andrew Wheeler. Andrew Wheeler, amazing person. Since the 80s, when he was a kid, his mom was into animal rights. He was fighting against animal testing. He wrote an op-ed in college saying that we need to end animal testing, 40 years ago. Fast forward, 2019, he becomes the head of the EPA. Huh. And he's in a position, and he's proud of it. He's like, I have the power now to actually end animal testing. The EPA, one of these agencies that not only conducts a lot of animal tests, about 20,000 animals are in the EPA's own laboratories down in North Carolina, but they mandate that chemical companies test, for example, pesticides. They force feed pesticides to puppies to test them to do safety testing before the EPA can approve them. So Andrew Wheeler gets in there, 2019. He says, we're putting a plan in place. By 2035, we're going to eliminate all animal testing. We're putting the EPA on a path, basically a 15-year plan to get rid of all animal testing that we conduct and we mandate. Incredible. Everyone celebrates this. 2021, Trump loses. They leave office. Within a couple months of Trump leaving office, the Biden EPA canceled the plan to end animal testing at the EPA. One of the reasons why, and there's receipts for this, is that the environmental organizations told the Biden administration that for environmental justice reasons,
There you go. Climate, I told you.
You need to keep doing animal testing because of vulnerable populations, and not only keep doing it and cancel Andrew Wheeler's plan, we want you to do more of it. Now, actually, as of today, I was just talking to the EPA today, they're putting the plan back in place to get rid of animal testing and retire lab
That's
animals.
Lee Zeldin.
Under Lee Zeldin, who White Coat Waste gave an award to when he was a congressman for leading efforts to get the VA. He's a veteran. He helped us get the VA to stop testing on dogs and cats back when he was a congressman. So we were thrilled when he was appointed as head of the EPA, and now he's keeping his promise and reinstating the plan to end animal testing at the EPA. But that's another great example. So under Biden, what was happening is all of a sudden, because there's wildfires and other things happening, guess what? Animal experimenters at the EPA inside their labs start taking mice and rats, locking them in tiny cages the size of a shoebox, buying plants, burning them to simulate wildfire smoke, like eucalyptus and stuff, the stuff that grows naturally on the West Coast, start pumping this wildfire smoke into these cages, fattening up the rats to mimic obesity, to see what the effects of obesity and wildfire smoke are. And then they would boost the temperature in the cages also to make it hot to simulate climate change. So this was the environmental justice experimentation under the Biden administration, was fattening up rats and mice, making their cages hot and forcing them to breathe wildfire smoke in the name of environmental justice. And they spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on this and tortured countless animals. We don't even know because they don't count the number of animals. But yeah, people don't realize the effect, people care about all different issues, and that's fine, but they don't realize that animals pay the price in so many cases for these social trends that maybe seem innocent, maybe don't, maybe you agree with them, maybe you don't, but ultimately, animals are victimized in some way, especially when it comes to science and transgender animal experiments and environmental justice experiments at the EPA are like poster children for that.
So the EPA is going to stop animal testing. What other agencies besides the National Institutes of Health are still doing testing?
So there's about 20 federal agencies that are involved one way or another in animal experimentation. NIH is by far the single largest funder of it. FDA obviously is mandating a lot of testing. They also have their own laboratories where there's monkeys and rabbits and other animals, but we've been very successful at shutting down some of the FDA's monkey labs. In 2018, the Trump administration, we exposed nicotine addiction experiments that the FDA was doing on baby monkeys inside the FDA. We shut those down. They sent those monkeys to a sanctuary in Florida, and we've dramatically reduced the use of monkeys at the FDA since then. And the new FDA leadership under Trump, Marty McCary, has released a plan to phase out a lot of testing over the next 3 to 5 years and reduce some of them.
Why does it have to take 3 to 5 years? Because of the regulation?
It doesn't need to take 3 to 5 years. Animal testing could be ended overnight if there was the political will to do it. Now, finding a place for all these animals is a different story.
Sure.
There's logistical challenges there, but this is part of the problem we have at the NIH right now is I've spoken to Jay Bhattacharya. I was on his Twitter Spaces a lot. The new head of the NIH. I was on his Twitter Spaces a bunch, but so was my boss Anthony before he was confirmed as NIH director. He's a supporter of ours. RFK is a longtime supporter of White Coat Waste. Jay, I think, is on the right side of this issue. Unfortunately, he has people around him, people who are Biden, Obama people, who are still at the NIH, who have risen into leadership roles, who are saying we can't end animal testing overnight. We're not going to cut any animal tests. We're going to maybe phase it out at some point in the future, but we're not going to end it now. Because we need to develop alternatives first. But we actually don't need animal tests are bad science. We don't need an alternative to them. We just need to end them, and then those resources could be spent elsewhere. But we're not getting anything from them now. And you're kind of feeding into this myth that animal tests have some kind of value when they don't. And it is, to your point, we can end this overnight. The NIH, it just happened recently. Trump's U.S. Navy Secretary, John Phelan, went on Twitter, posted a video of himself saying, effective right now when I sign this piece of paper, we are banning dog and cat testing. And they did, as a result of an investigation we did.
The Navy did that.
The Navy did, just banned it overnight and started canceling grants for cat testing. We exposed cat constipation experiments that the DOD was funding where they were taking cats and putting marbles up their butts and then electroshocking them for constipation experiments. The DOD spent $10 million on this, and we exposed it. And I woke up one Sunday morning, and there was a DOD tweet saying, effective immediately, this grant is canceled.
Who did that?
Pete Hegseth.
Does DOD have any more?
Yes, the DOD is still funding more dog and cat labs, but we are working with them to end the rest of them.
And are they going to do it?
I hope so.
And quickly?
From your lips to God's ears. We're working with Congress also to enact legislation that would prohibit the DOD permanently from spending any money on dog and cat testing specifically.
Why does DOD need to do dogging? Why does the Navy need to be involved in cat constipation testing? Why does DOD need to be involved in any of that?
A lot of it is for drug development. So a lot of it, none of these agencies operate in a vacuum, right?
Yeah.
So you see, when we talk about the DOD doing, funding dog and cat testing or dog testing mostly, it's because they're funding drug development by private companies, and those private companies are being told by the FDA that they need to test on dogs, and that the DOD is paying for them to do the animal tests. So that's why it's important to kind of a holistic approach to address this at every agency, because they're all interconnected.
Okay. So is this the kind of thing that Trump can address with an executive order?
Yes.
Like, can you just stop all animal testing across the federal government, every agency, remove it from FDA requirements? Can you do all of that in one executive order?
That's a great question. It'd probably be a long executive order.
Who cares how long it is?
Yeah, I mean, in theory, he could probably, I'm sure he could sign some executive order that at least directs agencies to do their own version of whatever that is.
First of all, you can stop.
You could say, effective today, we don't do this anymore.
The federal government no longer does any testing on animals whatsoever.
Yeah.
Any animal.
Yeah.
And then you can worry about housing them.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously getting animals out of labs and out of cages is an issue, having people to take care of them. But if you're going to save all the money you were spending on those programs, surely some of those funds could be used to create facilities where they could be, where they could be looked after until to live out their days peacefully.
Yeah. And there's examples from the first Trump administration where they cracked down on different types of animal testing.
Yeah.
There's great templates for that. Right, so they've done the right thing in the past.
Which forms did they crack down on? Monkeys.
So EPA.
Yeah.
They put in this phase out plan in place, which is great. That was the first time ever a federal agency said, we're setting a hard and fast deadline. We're drawing a line in the sand, and after this, this isn't going to happen anymore. FDA ended its primate testing, the nicotine tests on primates, and started reducing and actually shut down its largest primate lab. The NIH, with regard to fetal tissue experimentation, most of which involves animals, they basically cut the funding overnight for that and said, we're not funding any new grants, and we're going to set up a review committee, and we're not going to review any new grants or approve any new grants until this review committee looks at them. And ultimately, they had a review committee that denied everything, which was great. So there's lots of examples in place. The USDA shut down the kitten cannibalism lab that I was mentioning and adopted the animals. And that was something, again, that was a decision that was made overnight by the secretary, Sonny Perdue at the time at the USDA, who said, we don't do this anymore. We're ending these projects. We're adopting these cats out, and we're not going to fund this again in the future. We're not doing cat experiments anymore. It's over. So if there's the political will to do this,
you can do it.
You can do it. The problem is, and we're seeing again, the VA has done the right thing. The VA has eliminated all dog and cat and primate testing. It's the first agency.
They've limited it.
They've eliminated it. Eliminated dog, cat, and primate testing at the VA.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a lot of good things going on.
Could you write that executive order for the president?
I would be happy to. I've already started writing things that could be turned into something like that.
How long would it take you? I want to know how fast we can get President Donald Trump and his administration to stop this immediately.
Yeah, I help write legislation for a living, right? So part of my job is lobbying.
Yeah, you have the air of a man who knows how to write an executive order.
Thank you. I'm flattered. Thank you very much. Probably in a weekend we can get something, probably even quicker than that.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, because it doesn't have to be that detailed. It just has to say, effective now. We're not going to be doing this. And then you tell each agency that they have to figure out some type of regulation or rule to implement whatever the president wants.
Just first you stop testing.
Yeah, I mean,
that's the first thing. Just stop testing. So you worry about, the other parts of it later, like what you replace it with. Yeah. You can do that. And you can suspend the FDA requirement. Mandate,
and Rand Paul actually has enacted legislation that effectively has done that. The FDA just hasn't updated its regulations and guidance documents.
So is that regulation already in place? It's been passed?
Rand Paul has passed and enacted a law that is now the law of the land that gives companies the freedom to not test on animals if they don't want to. The problem is that all of these outdated FDA industry guidance documents, many of which, and you will appreciate this especially, are international guidance documents that are written with the EU and other countries.
There we go, globalism.
Exactly.
Again.
That require animal testing still. So the FDA, even though the law says drug companies don't have to test on animals anymore, the FDA has all these industry guidance documents that come through this international body saying, actually, the law might say that, but in practice, you still are going to. And I work with a pharmaceutical company that is right now being told by the FDA, we are not going to advance your drug into the next stage of clinical trials unless you poison a bunch of puppies.
Okay. Seriously?
Again, I would love, and maybe, again, Trump, if you're watching, let's get this executive order done. We'll bring a bunch of rescued lab beagles to the White House. They can play on the lawn, and we can celebrate. And then you have to tell these agencies, go and do your thing, but you gotta stop mandating this. You gotta stop funding it. But DOJ is already done. Like, again, speaking of, being able to do these things overnight, transgender animal experiments. Trump at the State of the Union made fun of these, said this is an incredible waste of money, one of the things we need to cut. Next day, I woke up to a DOJ tweet saying we canceled all the grants. They were just done.
And none of those have been reinstated?
Not yet, but there are those lawsuits.
Yeah, there are lawsuits. Okay, let's see the judges that want to continue animal experimentation. Let's see the congressmen and senators. Let's see the officials and bureaucrats and members of, private companies who want to continue these experiments. Let's look at all of these people. Let's have this conversation out in the open. Yeah. Because for me, it'd be a hard no anyway, even with the benefit for human beings. Obviously, I have 19,000 dogs, not to mention another 20,000 cats. Yeah, and I've had everything from alpacas to squirrels. And my dog, as we speak, is probably having her 8th puppy. It's just given the fact that even the pharmaceutical industry, the medical industry, right, the scientific community, even they have acknowledged at this point that the benefit of animal experimentation is very limited because it just doesn't apply to humans, right?
Yeah.
That's not an overstatement.
No, it's not at all. That's an understatement. It could actually kill people.
Even worse, you can be misled because the science is so bad.
Yeah, or you can use animal experiments to create a new virus that didn't exist before. Like what we exposed happened in Wuhan. White Coat Waste was the group that exposed in April 2020 that Fauci funded gain of function in Wuhan.
Okay, now I remember that very well. I remember when you came out, that's the first time I heard your name.
Yeah.
That's why when I heard that testimony on the Hill, I was like, oh, I remember these people. Okay, so let's talk about that because one of the most striking things in your testimony for me, because I grew up in South Africa and I grew up during the AIDS epidemic, HIV, we were told, the common story everywhere was that HIV was created, basically it was a zoonotic disease that passed from a monkey to humans because there was a missionary that had sex with monkeys, right? And then somehow a flight attendant was involved in spreading it all over the world.
Yeah, I remember those stories,
So let's see how many targets we have there. Okay, so, a zoonotic disease obviously had to be a missionary because we have to always make Christians look bad, right? And then gay people, we got to make gay people look bad. And also we have to justify why this is targeting gay people, right? And so I heard you say, and you tell me if I heard right, I heard you say monkeys cannot get HIV, they had to inject them.
Yes, monkeys don't get human HIV. We've created in the laboratory, there's SIV, which is the monkey version of HIV. But monkeys don't get HIV. There's versions that are in the laboratory that we use as facsimiles or to kind of mimic human HIV. But this was what happened.
So there's no way that humans could have gotten
HIV from a monkey.
From a monkey.
No, and actually, even chimps, the disease, this is a great example how diseases don't work the same in everybody. The same disease might not work the same in everyone. Fauci, obviously Fauci is central to all of this. Fauci, and I talked about this in the hearing in February, Fauci isn't just some bureaucrat and paper pusher, okay? If you go back to the 80s when he started working at NIH, and actually even before that in his career, but go back to his beginning of his career at the NIH, Fauci was personally infecting chimpanzees with HIV in the NIH's laboratories.
What do you mean personally?
He was designing and conducting the experiments and going in the labs and doing this. Fauci was personally involved in designing and conducting HIV experiments on monkeys until the end of 2022 when he left the NIH. So Fauci has been an animal experimenter, himself infecting primates with HIV and other diseases, COVID and other diseases, since the 80s. So he's a bad guy on his own.
Let's not forget he was also taking African-American, Hispanic-American children, babies, who were foster kids, who had no parents to protect them. And he was doing HIV drug experiments on them.
Right.
So he went from animals to children, and the most vulnerable children because they had no families.
Yeah.
They had no one to protect them. And by the way, that was exposed, I think, in the 1980s by NBC News as one of the organizations. So this wasn't considered then a left-right thing. This was, at least at that time, you could just deal with that on its merits or lack of merits, so to speak, right? And just expose it for what it was. And it was pretty widely covered, and this is why there was, I forget his name now, but the famous gay rights activist who wrote that letter to Fauci that was just filled with hatred.
It wasn't Peter Taschel. I'm forgetting who it was. Yeah, I know who you mean. Yeah,
maybe you can look it up. No, it wasn't Harvey Milk, but if you look at that letter that he wrote, where he was just so angry because Fauci created a drug in AZT, that mimicked the progression of AIDS. So families thought that their loved ones were dying of HIV, but they were dying from AZT.
Yeah.
And people didn't know, oh, wait, what does that sound like? Oh, my goodness. Yeah, that sounds a lot like remdesivir.
Yeah.
Which was pushed as the holy grail, medication as an answer to COVID that was also killing people by poisoning their livers, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And who is the common denominator in all of this? Small, nasty little man, Dr. Anthony Fauci of the NIH.
Yeah. So that's all true. And so in the 80s, when he started doing the chimp experiments, he was promising this was going to be the silver bullet, right? That if we get chimps, who are the closest genetically to humans, if we just get enough of chimps in labs and infect them with HIV, we're going to get a vaccine. So first of all, fast forward half a century, we don't have an AIDS vaccine. Second of all, what they soon discovered after breeding hundreds and thousands of chimps and locking them in laboratories, chimps don't get AIDS, and even if they do get something that looks like AIDS, they don't get sick.
It's just something they carry.
Yes. They don't get sick from it. So he promised this was going to be the silver bullet cure. And that's like a great shining example of animal experimentation misleads and all the billions of dollars spent on these chimp experiments that were misleading. So then...
And it's a virus anyway.
Yes.
And we all know that viruses, you can't vaccinate against a virus.
So we had HIV, which is a great example. And then you have COVID. And the interesting theme when you look at HIV and you look at COVID is when you think about kind of the story behind them, that it could potentially be plausible that in this area of the world, when you're exposed to these animals in this place under these circumstances, a virus that is something like this could get to humans. That's the same thing that they said about COVID, right? That we're in Wuhan and there's these nasty wet markets and someone brought a bunch of bats there from 1,000 miles away in the caves and somehow this virus jumped to humans. But there were never any bats in the wet market. The only reason there were bats in Wuhan is because there were researchers funded by Fauci who had gone into the caves 1,000 miles away in Yunnan and brought these bats and their viruses to Wuhan. And then on the doorstep of this laboratory, a virus that looks like something that could have come from one of those bats breaks out. And you can say that this happened. Nature caused this. But there's no evidence in Wuhan or anywhere in China that nature caused this. There's no intermediate. They've never found a single animal that spread this virus to humans.
No.
There's never been an intermediate animal. There's no virus that exists like this with the spike protein in nature, in this class of coronaviruses. But we do have Fauci and Peter Daszak and EcoHealth and Batwoman at the Wuhan lab who had been and Ralph Barrick who at UNC, who for years had been cooking up viruses exactly like the one that caused the pandemic.
Well, COVID-19 means 19 variations, right? That's what the 19 actually stands for.
I
understand that from virologists. I mean, I could have that wrong, but I was told that that's what the 19 represents. And I was told that from day one. But also, just to unpack that there for people who don't know, Ralph Barrick from EcoHealth Alliance.
Well, he's from the University of North Carolina.
University of North Carolina, and Peter Danzig from EcoHealth Alliance.
Yeah.
And at Chapel Hill.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And how that's basically how Fauci got around the fact that gain-of-function research was banned under the Obama administration. Congress said, oh, this looks bad. We're weaponizing viruses. Basically, gain of function. What does that mean? We're giving a virus, so you may have a cold virus, we're giving it a function. It's gaining a function, a lethality that it doesn't otherwise have, that doesn't exist in nature. We're creating it, and we're giving it to that virus. We're enhancing it, which is basically a weapons program. And Congress said, no, this could go bad. This could go wrong. So they banned it. And what did Fauci and the NIH and NIAID, right? What did they do? They farmed it out to EcoHealth Alliance and the University of North Carolina. And they did it that way. They created a layer of bureaucracy between them and the experimentation. And of course, they did this all with Wuhan. But as you know, multiple intelligence people told me when Wuhan happened, I mean, the first people I talked to are not the doctors and the scientists. I spoke to a lot of them, but the first ones I go to are the intelligence. Why? Because I know that when you build a lab in China, you're not building it to save people. The Chinese can point to no drugs or medical procedures that they have pioneered and gifted to the world that have saved people. Their own people die every day of the most basic diseases because they don't care. They build labs for weapons. So if there's a facility that's built in China, guess who's monitoring that from the first moment that it's conceived of? The United States intelligence apparatus. Yeah. So when they said, oh, we don't know what's happening in Wuhan, I know that's not true.
Well, the State Department, there were, April 2020, we released a story about Fauci's funding. It goes, pun intended, it goes viral. And then all of a sudden, a few weeks later, Josh Rogan at the Washington Post releases these State Department memos that he had obtained from 2018, where the State Department was worried about safety and the type of gain-of-function experiments that the Wuhan lab was doing.
So that's the cover your ass article.
So
control the narrative.
Yeah, but all of a sudden it's like, oh, people have been warning about this place for years.
Mm-hmm. No, they didn't care until they were being exposed because of what you did.
Yeah, exactly. They didn't care. And the zoonotic disease story would have kept going. Except we got the receipts that Fauci funded it. Then we got emails from 2016 where during the ban, NIH writes to Peter Daszak at EcoHealth and says, we've put a pause on your research because it looks like gain of function.
Yeah, which is illegal.
Yeah. And then Daszak basically, they let him rewrite the rules and say, okay, unless you make this virus 10,000 times more deadly than it currently is, you're cool. And you know who's in charge of monitoring this? The Wuhan lab.
Because that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Put China in charge of monitoring.
Let China tell you if it gets too dangerous.
Because China's idea of what's dangerous is...
And Fauci signed off on this. So that's how the funding first went to Wuhan.
And how much money did they get for that?
So, well, it's hard to say because since then, there was a $3.7 million grant that went to EcoHealth, and then they gave out about $600,000 to the Wuhan lab for this. But then we discovered that USAID
of course, another
was
beauty.
also funding the laboratory, and actually the person believed to be one of the patient zero. That, again, we have these records through the Freedom of Information Act. One of the people believed to be one of the patient zero for COVID-19 was an experimenter at the Wuhan lab who ran the gain-of-function laboratory and was being funded by Fauci and USAID to design the virus that caused the pandemic.
Yep.
And, of course, a hallmark of any bioweapons program is creating a virus that conceivably could be believed to have come out of nature and just happened to naturally occur. So creating a bat coronavirus in China and then say that it came out of this disgusting wet market, we saw it worked. Most people believe that for many years. Like now, 70% of the U.S. public believes that a lab leak caused COVID, as does the FBI, the CIA, the Department of Energy. And I'm sure other agencies will eventually admit that that's what they believe.
Now they've been forced to admit it.
Exactly.
There was just no hiding from the truth on that one.
No.
And there were, I'm just a journalist, and I don't even have the weight of a big corporation or news organization behind me. And I knew enough people, including an incredible doctor who now is dead, he told me in the first week after COVID, this has HIV strain in it, it has TB in it. There's no way. He said this was inserted in a lab. There's no way this occurred in nature. It is absolutely scientifically, biologically impossible. Plus, this virus is replicating in cold and hot climates at the same time. That doesn't happen in nature.
Yeah.
Everything about that was manipulation.
Viruses don't start off deadly like that. They evolve to become deadly.
Correct.
This came out of the box killing people. And China had a vaccine before it was determined to be declared a pandemic. China had developed a vaccine somehow.
Of course, because you don't want to unleash a bioweapon that you are at risk of dying from.
Yeah, and of course,
they don't do it until they know, okay, I'm going to be all right.
We'll be all right, exactly.
And it wasn't the vaccine that made them all right. They probably didn't even take the vaccine because there were plenty of other treatments. Yeah. They had to deny that ivermectin worked with a Z-Pak and vitamin D and hydroxychloroquine because then they couldn't get the emergency use authorization from the FDA. Because as long as there is a treatment that is available, you do not have justification for an emergency use authorization, and you have to go through the long process. And they didn't want to do that because they had a different plan, not to mention how much money they made out of it. So they're mass murderers, and Fauci is one of the greatest mass killers in history. I was told this by multiple doctors and other people working on this. RFK Jr., of course, his book was a big part of this in exposing a lot of this, and he did an amazing job with that.
Yeah.
But over and over again, people said to me, Fauci will go down as one of the greatest mass killers in history. How many people has that man been directly and indirectly responsible for murdering?
Yeah, and credit to RFK and Trump for prioritizing banning gain of function. Unfortunately,
you mean
now they have. Unfortunately, obviously Biden pardoned Fauci, but there's still ways we
with
can
the order pin. I mean,
probably
who pardoned Fauci? We don't know.
Yeah, we don't know.
I mean, the truth is we don't know.
Yeah,
he might have.
Yeah.
But he also, there's strong evidence to suggest that he didn't. Okay, but you say full credit to Trump. The one area where Trump still gets pounded is on the vaccines, right? I mean, I don't know.
Well, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Well, I don't know. I don't know how to understand that one because it just seems like such a vulnerability. And at this point, how can anybody? I mean, it seems like he was deceived and lied to. I don't know.
I mean, again, within days of us exposing Fauci's funding for the Wuhan lab, Trump famously went on the coronavirus briefing when they were being televised every day and said, this is tremendous waste. We're cutting this immediately. Cut off the grant. We were demonized. This is when white coat waste.
When was that?
This was April 2020. This is when white coat waste went from being celebrated as a picture of bipartisanship by groups by outlets like the Washington Post and the New York Times and whoever else, to right-wing conspiracy theory nuts. And all of a sudden, overnight,
you went from darling of the media to untouchable,
to
right?
The devil. We were just, they couldn't write anything positive. everything we did all of a sudden was anti-science, conspiracy theories. No one has written a positive story about us of any of those media outlets since then, because we dared to question Fauci and the narrative that was happening about the origin of the virus.
That mirrors what happened to me.
Yeah.
Absolutely
Yes,
mirrors
I was thinking
it.
about that,
I was
actually.
the darling
Yeah.
of the media. New York Times, Washington Post, Vogue magazine, Glamour Woman of the Year. Yeah, I mean, they couldn't get enough of me. And then when I did with Obama, exactly what I did under Bush and Cheney and Rumsfeld, I was like, I didn't change what I was doing. I thought Obama was, I told him when I interviewed him, he reminded me of a young Mandela, which, Nelson Mandela.
Yeah.
That's the greatest compliment I
Yeah.
could have paid him.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
regretted it, though, because he wasn't anything like Mandela.
Yeah, it was striking, but we knew we were doing the right thing. We were watching the evidence unfold. We were getting these records through FOIA, and we were like, the story about the wet market doesn't make sense. And actually,
No, it's a complete
funny
lie.
because the kitten cannibalism experiments are actually what led us to the Wuhan laboratory, because when we exposed the kitten cannibalism experiments in 2018, what they were doing, the USDA was flying staff to China to wet markets, buying dog and cat meat, flying it back in their carry-on luggage to the USDA, which obviously now we know like that's insanely dangerous to buy wet market meat and bring it back to the US.
Yeah, you can't bring bush meat. I've
and
witnessed
yes.
people being deported, because
Exactly.
they dared to try to bring bush meat
So
into
this is essentially
America.
that. And they're feeding these cats, the kittens cat meat and then killing them in these experiments. So then we started digging into
Why?
They wanted to know if the cat and dog meat they were selling in wet markets carried the toxoplasmosis parasite. Basically, they created a cottage industry where they would just fly around the world to different wet markets and say, does this strange meat have toxoplasmosis? Does this strange meat have, they were doing it in South America, all over Asia. It became just a program inside the USDA that went on for like 50 years. They killed 3,000 cats in this laboratory.
And toxoplasmosis is what?
Toxoplasmosis is a parasite that people might have heard of. You can get if you're a pregnant woman and you handle cat feces, but very rarely transmitted to people unless you come in direct contact with cat poop and like put it in your mouth. I mean, it's just not happening. So,
And by the way, no one wants to touch cat poop.
no. And it's treatable. Anyway, so we start looking at what else is the government funding in foreign countries? What other crazy programs are the government funding? So throughout 2019, we started investigating what the US government, NIH, and other agencies were funding in foreign countries. And we found this list of, at the time, I think it was 300 something laboratories, but over 30 labs in China, including ones run by the CCP and PLA, were eligible to receive NIH money. One of them was the Wuhan lab. So in December of 2019, when this virus breaks out, before it was a pandemic, when we're still trying to figure out what's going on, we're looking at this list and we're like, oh my God, there's this lab. There were two labs in Wuhan at the time on this list, the Wuhan University and the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which was the one that unleashed the virus. And we contacted the White House and we were like, we need to come and meet with you about what's happening in the Wuhan laboratory. And we met with them in January. Actually, Louise Linton, Steve Mnuchin, Secretary Mnuchin's wife, came with us. She's a big supporter of ours, great animal advocate. And we met with the White House and told them about what's going on, and we never heard back from them.
What year was that?
This was January of 2020. So when the virus was circulating, but it had not yet been declared a pandemic.
And who did you meet with?
Some staff from the Domestic Policy Council, not someone high up.
Yeah.
But we flagged this list for him and said, there's this lab in Wuhan getting this funding. And we didn't hear back. And then a couple months later, finally, we were like, we just have to release this. We can't wait for people to take action. And we released it in conjunction with Congressman Matt Gaetz. He went on Tucker Carlson a couple days later, talked about the investigation we had done. And then Trump called him as soon as he got off TV and was like, what do we need to do? And he's like, you got to cut the funding. And then Trump famously went on and cut the funding for the Wuhan lab. So that was like, swift, decisive action from Trump on the Wuhan lab. And we are very grateful for that. But it's taken, obviously, way too long to finally get rid of gain of function. I mean, that's still not totally settled yet, defunding gain of function. There's still 19 labs in China that are eligible to get money from the NIH as of this morning.
Well, it's very interesting what you're saying about HIV, that monkeys can't get human HIV, and that there's a sort of a monkey version, right? That it doesn't make them sick. Because when you talked about the bats, I was on the front line of an Ebola treatment center in Liberia at the height of the Ebola epidemic. We had with us a wonderful virologist, hemorrhagic scientist, actually specialist in blood. It was very, very dangerous because when people die from Ebola, it's such a terrible death. And your capillaries just melt away and you bleed from every orifice. And the doctors there told us that some of these doctors were from Stanford and other places and nurses and that. And I remember the one doctor said, I said, what do you need? And he said, Valium. I said, what do you mean? And he said, I'll never forget it. He said, the moment of death, he said, it's like nothing you've ever seen.
Yeah.
It's horrific. He said, and we can't do anything for them. The only thing we do is we pump them full of as much Valium as possible. Now, I'm looking in the confirmed ward, which is just behind a plastic orange construction fence. I'm looking at babies, little kids. I'm looking at little kids, looking after smaller kids, big kids. I mean, it's just awful. And he says, there's nothing we can do. We don't have enough Valium. So you just imagine for a moment, we're in the graveyard, and the grave diggers say me, in Liberia, they have this way they speak. It's like pidgin English, and they say, almost like Creole, right? They say, where'd Ebola come from? Which is, where does Ebola come from? Yeah. And I'm all fully confident, right? Because I don't know anything. But I believe in science. I believe in the government. I believe in all. I said, well, confidently, I said, well, it comes from bats. What do you mean it comes from bats? No, it's just like, I don't understand. And I said, wait. I went and got the scientist. I said, Joseph Ferry, amazing man. I said, Joseph, these guys have some questions. Come on, can you come help them? Sure, he says. So they start to talk, and they ask him the same question. Where did Ebola come from? And he says, the bats. And of course, the Marburg virus is what bats have. That's the cousin of Ebola. Yeah. No one has ever found Ebola in a bat. Never happened in history. I don't make the connection at that time, right? You just think they haven't found the right bat. So these guys, all these grave diggers, they look at him and they say, this one guy, I never forget it. He says, he says, did Ebola come from the bat? Joseph says, yes. He says, how? And he says, well, do you eat bats? And they're all like, oh, yeah, they all eat bats. I said, well, that's how. Zoonotic disease, right? Jumps from the animal to the bat. And he says, my father ate a bat. He know the Ebola. My grandfather ate a bat. He know the Ebola. We never seen this before. We never know the Ebola. Why we have the Ebola? He didn't believe it. Yeah. Because he knew generation to generation to generation, they didn't have Ebola.
Yeah.
So it didn't come from the bats because as long as there have been people living in that part of the world, they've been eating bats. And they did just fine.
Yeah.
And that's the great lie, isn't it?
That's the beauty of the best bioweapons program will make you think that it just was created by nature. And that's, what RFK was talking about this the other day about like the no-seum technology that Ralph Barrett created. So you can engineer a virus
that nobody can see.
And no one knows it was engineered. It looks like it was natural. But then when you start to look at the characteristics of that virus, like people have, it's like, why isn't there any other virus in nature that looks like this? It has this spike protein that's from elsewhere that is all of a sudden showing up in a coronavirus and taking this virus that was not lethal and making it extremely deadly to humans right out of the gate. That's a bioweapon. And that's what happened after 2001, after 9/11. That's when Fauci kind of gained his power at NIH, is when the DOD basically exported all the bioweapons research into NIAID to make it look like infectious disease research.
Yes.
And that's why NIAID has a laboratory in Montana full with animals who are being infected with Marburg, Ebola, COVID, Lassa, incurable viruses, all that have suspect origins, and that we're being told that this is for public health, that if one of these things breaks out, we need to have a vaccine for it.
Is that true?
Well, no. First of all, no. I mean, these viruses are not going to come here and cause an outbreak in the United States, first of all. So there's an inordinate amount of resources being poured into studying this very small class of viruses that's not making Americans sick or never have been here and don't exist on U.S. soil unless you bring them here.
But you could argue, right, their argument is that they are brought here by international air travel, right? That a sick patient will come here and that in the global world, this is how things travel.
Sure.
But really, don't you think we'd be beset by, viruses and diseases at this point if that were really true? Not to say it's not possible. And what animals are being infected with these horrible viruses?
Primates. Fauci helped establish and keep going an island off the coast of South Carolina called Morgan Island. It's in Congresswoman Nancy Mace's district. I visited with her on a boat. And they have 3,700 monkeys on this island who live wild on this island, who were brought there in the late 70s. And they breed. I think 75% of the females on that island breed every year. And then each year they take 500 to 600 of those monkeys off the island. NIH goes and gets them and brings them to DOD laboratories and NIAID laboratories and uses them in HIV, Ebola, Nipah, Lassa, and other hemorrhagic fever experiments.
Which are the most awful ways to die.
And in a lot of these experiments, these animals are experiencing exactly what you saw, where they don't give them any pain relief, they don't give them any treatment, and they just watch the course. They sometimes test experimental treatments, or sometimes they're just looking to see what a certain strain of the virus does, and they just watch these animals bleed out and convulse and die. And we have letters from Fauci where he defends this to Nancy Mace. He signed it with his own signature. But that's become a big business. There's a company that makes $4 million, getting back to our kind of the theme here, there's a company that makes $4 million a year to manage that island for a NIAID, to just, keep the monkeys fed and make sure everything's fine over there.
And don't they do that with beagles too?
Oh yeah, there's puppy mills around the country at colleges and universities, but also private companies that are just giant warehouses full of tens of thousands of beagles and kittens who are just born to die in these facilities. And in some of the laboratories, they breed the cats, the kittens, and the puppies to have birth defects and brain disorders, so they can't walk, they can't see. We were talking earlier about sewing kittens' eyes shut to cause to damage the brain development. So when you unsew their eyes, they can't see properly. There's these facilities that are all being funded with our taxpayer dollars. This industry could not exist the way it does, at least, if taxpayers weren't subsidizing the overwhelming majority of it, from the breeding of the animals to building the cages to transporting the animals to experimenting on them to building the torture devices to paying the experimenters to buying the lab space to paying for the incinerators to run to kill the animals. We're paying for all of that. If taxpayers stop footing the bill, if Trump writes this executive order, these labs are going to shut down overnight, because this stuff is completely unnecessary, and the private sector would never, ever invest money in stupid things like giving puppies heart attacks and putting them on treadmills, like the government has been and continues to pay for, literally.
Right, 34 years?
Yeah.
34 years of forcing high blood pressure medication into dogs and making them run on treadmills until their hearts burst.
Yeah, and in some of the experiments we exposed that the VA was doing that Lee Zeldin helped us end, they were injecting latex into puppies' arteries to induce heart attacks and then forcing them to run on treadmills. And again, most of this, there's not even a stated application for humans. It's curiosity-driven research. What happens if we do this? What happens if we do that, manipulate this? And you make a whole career out of tinkering with animals, and there's actually no incentive to innovate, because the second you solve the problem, your grant money goes away. So why would you do that? If you're a rational person and you don't really care about animals, and maybe you're a sociopath, but if you're a rational person and you don't really care about the animal component of it, you want to keep the faucet on, keep the spigot on as long as possible to keep the money flowing. So your incentive is actually to not solve the problem and to let the problem keep existing and just say you're trying to do your best to solve it. So there isn't the incentive to innovate right now. But private companies do have an incentive to innovate because they're spending their own money. So they're not going to do anything that they deem unnecessary. I mean, in some cases, the government's forcing them to. But if the government wasn't forcing them to, they're not going to fund this type of animal experimentation because there's no benefit for them. There's only cost. There's only liability.
Well,
there's
yeah,
only
and
bad
once people
PR.
know about the truth, they don't want anything to do with it.
Exactly, and that's why the cosmetics industry got reformed.
Yeah.
Because you could boycott a cosmetics company. You could say, I'm going to buy from someone else. You got to pay your taxes or you get locked up. So that's the only way to boycott the government is to not pay your taxes, and you have to. So you have no choice. That's why when we talk about this problem, it's that you and I are being forced to pay for this, even if we don't want to, even if we don't need this. Even if we don't want this, we are being forced to pay for it, and there's no accountability. And there's no accountability for the people doing the experiments. It doesn't matter if we're actually getting anything of benefit. They continue to get the money anyway.
And Justin, you mentioned Nancy Mace.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, Nancy Mace was on this bipartisan committee where you were testifying recently.
Yeah.
It was interesting because even her Democratic counterpart said, I think it was her who made the comment that this is an issue that we didn't have any trouble coming together on this.
Yeah, this is a great uniting issue. I work with everyone from the Freedom Caucus to the Squad. And that's not just a talking point. That's
crazy.
Literally true. I was on the Hill a couple months ago, and I was in the hallway out front of Nancy Mace's office, and I was standing with Congresswoman Anna Paulina Luna from Florida, Republican.
Yeah.
And Ayanna Pressley, member of the Squad from Massachusetts, is walking by.
Yeah.
Anna Paulina Luna goes, Ayanna, you have to come and meet this beagle. And all of a sudden, I'm standing with a member of the Squad.
You had the puppy with you.
Yeah, we had a beagle rescued from one of Fauci's suppliers. And all of a sudden, I'm standing with Ayanna Pressley and Anna Paulina Luna in front of Nancy Mace's office with this rescued beagle. And everyone's saying, we do need to do something about this.
Could you go and look at that puppy and not melt?
Right, because they're the great ambassadors. They're the ones who got out alive, and they represent the 50,000 who are still locked up and the tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands more that are going to continue to be tortured unless Congress does something about this. Congress controls the purse strings. So in addition to trying to get the Trump administration to do as much good as we can, we also need to and continue to, and that's a big part of my job, is working with Congress to enact legislation to actually control the spending, restrict the spending, cut the funding for these programs. So I work on, again, with Democrats and Republicans in Congress to cut funding for NIH. We're working on this right now to introduce legislation to cut funding for NIH animal testing, DOD animal testing, USDA animal testing. Some cases, all of it. In some cases, primates, mice and rats, dogs and cats. We're trying to restrict funding for the breeding on that island off South Carolina in Nancy Mace's district. Obviously, that's an issue near and dear to her because it's a local problem. It's always been a very bipartisan issue. Even if you go back to the beginnings of this as a kind of a movement in the United States, like the animal testing issue is not new. Since the 1880s, it started in England, but since the 1880s in the United States, there's been a movement to end animal experimentation. Always very bipartisan. And if you look at the history of it in Congress going back to the 60s, often Republican-led, but always bipartisan. Bob Dole starting in the 60s, Bob Smith, a Republican firebrand in the 80s, Rick Santorum, all people who were great on this issue. And over my 20-year history of working on this, that was always the case. And actually, it skewed Democrat for a long time. There were the establishment animal rights groups like PETA kind of had monopolized this issue, and most bills in Congress for a long time were very heavily Democrat, and there'd be one or two Republicans on some of the bills. And that was the rule, not the exception. And it was because these left-leaning organizations didn't even go to talk to the Republican members of Congress because they assumed they wouldn't care about these issues. So then I start coming around and I'm like, wait a second, you're only hearing about this issue for the first time? They said, and these offices would tell me, these animal rights groups have never reached out to us once to ask for our help or ask what we thought. They just assume we're monsters and we're uncaring and callous people. Meanwhile, you have a country where 66% of the American public has dog or cat in their house and considers them a member of the family.
Yes.
And that's true across the political spectrum. That's not a Democrat or Republican thing. That's an American thing.
Sure it is.
So there was this blind spot for the establishment groups that really a lot of people I knew in the center and right, like my family included, felt homeless. They're like, I care about this issue, but I don't identify with these liberal animal rights groups, but I want to help, but there's nobody who's my voice An
Yes.
advocacy group that represents me and questions the government and is skeptical as the government and sees the government as the cause of this problem.
Yes.
It's not an individual problem. It's a systemic problem, and Uncle Sam is the villain here. People like Anthony Fauci are the problem. Bureaucrats are the problem.
Is there anyone worse than Anthony Fauci?
I argue that Anthony Fauci is responsible for more torture and death in animal laboratories than any other single person in history. And that's because, number one, the things he's done himself, like we were talking about, like spending half a century infecting primates with HIV and HIV-like viruses and other viruses. But also Anthony Fauci, for close to half a century, and most recently controlled a $6.5 billion budget inside the NIH. So the NIH has a $48 billion budget. Fauci alone controlled $6.5 billion of that, the second largest division within the NIH. And within that $6.5 billion, he probably funded more animal testing than any other institute inside the NIH. So dollar for dollar, both his own work torturing animals and the amount of suffering in animals he caused in the labs he funded, by far, there's no other single individual given the time he was there and the amount of money he controlled. And unfortunately, the guy who was appointed to take over as the head of NIAID is a gain-of-function proponent.
The infectious diseases component of the NIH.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. The National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Fauci's former division. He left in 2022. The guy recently appointed as acting director is a gain-of-function proponent who helped Fauci cover up the lab leak. And to your point,
his name is?
Jeffrey Taubenberger. And there's been reporting on this. Emily Kopp at the Daily Caller did a great piece about this. Jeffrey Taubenberger was actually involved in a successful scheme to dig up a dead body of someone who was infected with the 1918 flu and get the virus from this body for gain-of-function experiments.
Okay, yeah.
And now he's been appointed. So that's why, again, I like Jay Bhattacharya. I think he is on the right side of a lot of these issues, but there are forces inside the NIH that have been there for a long time that really want to maintain business as usual. And when I see someone like Jeff Taubenberger promoted to take over NIAID, at least as acting director, and I look at his track record of all the papers he published, signing on with Fauci about how COVID came out of a wet market and that myth, it makes me question who is making these decisions inside the agency, especially when we also have documented all of these animal testing grants that were funded under Fauci that have been renewed in the last few months. Monkey Island just got another $4 million. There's an experiment at the University of Missouri.
Who's responsible for that?
National Institute of Health, NIAID, Fauci's former division, just gave it another $4 million. A laboratory at the University of Missouri, Columbia, that plans to use 400 beagle puppies, infest them with ticks, and let the disease progress, Rocky Mountain spotted fever and other diseases progress, and not give them pain relief. That just got its funding renewed. So
who's responsible for that?
Also Fauci's former division. But this is all happening under the Trump administration and under Jay Bhattacharya. And I'm sure if Trump knew what was happening,
yes,
heads would roll.
Yes.
So hopefully, again, he's watching and he's going to do this executive order that you're suggesting, which is a brilliant idea, and also clean house it inside the NIH, because there's this Jeff Taubenberger is a problem, and then the woman who has been appointed as the animal testing czar is saying we're not going to cut animal tests overnight. Maybe in the future we will, but we're not going to do it now.
I saw her out there saying that. What's her name again?
Nicole Kleinstrauer.
Yeah, that's it. And then, but she also is an mRNA person.
Yeah, and she's retweeted repeatedly about how great Fauci is and Fauci receiving awards.
Yep.
And that's the type of people who've been running the NIH.
And they're still there, which is the really disturbing part. But, if Fauci hadn't been pardoned, what could he be prosecuted for? For example, you can't get someone for fraud if it was on a government contract.
Right.
But you can get them on waste and you can get them on abuse.
I have two clear-cut examples of felonies Fauci could have been prosecuted for. And we exposed one, and Rand Paul is responsible for the other one. First of all, Fauci repeatedly lied under oath to Rand Paul about funding gain-of-function in Wuhan. Not only did he fund it, we have the paper trail, the receipts that we've received through NIH, where there's the discussion about that research, the animal experiments Fauci funded in Wuhan, being gain-of-function. Recent past director of the NIH has since admitted under oath to Congress, yes, we funded gain-of-function in Wuhan. And Fauci repeatedly denied that under oath. And he knew better than anyone that it was true. So that's a felony, lying to Congress under oath. The second thing is that, and this ties back to something we were talking about earlier, the second thing Fauci could be prosecuted for, which is also a felony, is using his personal email to evade the Freedom of Information Act.
Yes.
And we obtained a copy of an email between him and the Washington Post where they were talking about his Beagle testing, and also and this was a woman who was in the process of writing a hit piece about us for criticizing him on Fauci and the Beagle testing. And her story ended up being a cover story saying we were lying and that we were interfering with COVID response and people were going to die because we were criticizing him about dog testing. So he's exchanging emails with her. She's exchanging emails with him on his NIH email address. She also sends him a story about the experiments on orphans in this email exchange. And he said, I'm going to write you from my Gmail address to discuss this.
Yeah.
Clear cut.
Yeah, and he's also avoiding the Federal Records Keeping Act, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there's multiple crimes there.
Yeah. And that's clear cut. So he can't be prosecuted for any of that now, unfortunately. But what Rand Paul was saying in the last couple of days is that they are going to get him, call him in front of Congress again, and he can't plead the fifth anymore.
Right. Now he has to tell the truth.
Now, again, I don't know
Because
if
he's
someone
been
like him
given-
is I don't know if he has the ability to tell the truth. I question,
Right.
because he is clearly a sociopath. I don't know that if he even knows what the truth is or cares about lying about it anymore. But in theory, yes, he can't plead the fifth anymore because he's been pardoned. So he would have to come in and tell the truth about what happened in Wuhan, about Beaglegate, about whatever other issues people like Rand Paul would want to ask him.
You know, it's fascinating to me because I was asked on Fox News, when Fauci went on Margaret Brennan's show, Face the Nation, on a Sunday morning, and he said if people were criticizing him, and he said, if you criticize me, you're criticizing science. Remember that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think it was Pete Hegseth, actually, who asked me about it on Fox News the next day, the next evening, and he said, Fauci says, if you criticize him, you're criticizing science. What do you say? And I said, well, I talk to a lot of people who don't see Fauci as science. They see him more as Dr. Joseph Mengele, the doctor of death, right, from the Nazi concentration camps. And, of course, that got me canceled from Fox. It was the end of my contract negotiations, end of my career there, end of, I didn't really have a career there because I was never paid to work there, but I just did all that work there because I believed in it. I thought it was important to get the truth out, and because I wanted to drive people to my show on Fox Nation, their digital service. But, and then he was interviewed by CNN. All these people gave him a chance to take shots at me. She doesn't know what she's talking about because I said this is basically like an extreme. Notice the flu numbers have gone down. Like what happened to flu? And was pointing out that COVID was replacing flu, right?
Yeah.
And that was flu-like. And of course they came out and admitted that not long after that. But he attacked me for she doesn't know what she's talking about. Came after me personally. Not that I cared because. I remembered standing in the graveyard on a Sunday evening in South Africa doing a story on HIV orphans and watching them dig the rows and rows and rows of these tiny graves for the babies that were all going to die of HIV that week. And I knew what Fauci had done to spread that. I had an argument in a market in Zimbabwe once with a bunch of people who said that HIV was created in the United States to target Black people and Africans. I thought they were nuts, but I think now that they were probably right.
COVID, this is true of so many people, but my experience during COVID, my organization's experience during COVID, really was a rude awakening about the media and about the government and the degree to which they will abuse their authority to promote whatever their agenda is. And we saw it firsthand. Things, my wife and I, it was eye-opening because things I knew to be true, things that me and my colleagues uncovered and we had receipts for, hard black and white copies of emails written by Fauci and other people, things I knew to be true.
Yeah.
The Washington Post on its cover was saying was a lie. And people on TV were saying was a lie. And Fauci was saying was a lie. And it's a mind fuck because you're like, well, did I lose my mind?
Right.
Or
And
is
by
the
the way,
government?
that's what they say about you. Oh, he's lost his mind, right? He's a conspiracy theorist.
Yeah. it's funny because on the Fauci Beagle testing stuff, of course, the Post ran a story saying fake Beagle research claims on the cover of the Sunday paper about things that were 100% true. A couple months at the end of last year, Washington Post ran a new story saying we got the fact checker. We actually got this wrong, and White Coat Waste was right. Of course, the Post never promoted that story. They did it. They tried to write a second hit piece, but I was able to provide them with the receipts, and they wrote a new story.
And what they do is they keep that so that they can say they corrected their piece, but no one sees it.
But you know what? Fauci in his book that came out last year, still calling us liars, saying everything. He loves dogs. No one loves dogs more than him. These are absolute lies.
Can you sue him?
Well, he's not saying us by name, but he's talking about the people who claim this are liars. There are still dog experiments happening now that the NIH just renewed that Fauci set into motion and funded. He admitted last year he signed off on all of them. So he's still out there saying that we're lying. So this is why I don't trust that if he gets in front of Congress again, even if he can't plead the fifth, that he's just going to keep lying because there's no consequences for anymore. The people who believe Fauci and believe in Fauci and have his bobblehead and all of that,
ridiculous.
They are always going to believe him and trust him. No matter what anyone says, no matter what anyone does, they're always going to believe him. So, and the people who hate him are going to keep hating him. So he doesn't really have an incentive to tell the truth. What's it going to get him at this point? He's going to disappoint his fanatics, like Nicole Kleinstrauer at the NIH and other people who really love him and revere him. So I don't see him coming in and being honest. He has nothing to gain. He only has to lose.
No, I never forget the pictures when I looked into Fauci and I saw the photographs of these young babies, little African-American and Hispanic-American babies, foster kids.
Yeah.
And knowing that what he did to them, I was like, this man is evil. I mean, you know it with COVID. You're watching people die all over the world from COVID and also, die unspeakable deaths from like domestic violence because they were locked in their homes and, all kinds of things, right? My father died during COVID. I couldn't say goodbye to my uncle died from COVID, all in South Africa, and I never got to say goodbye to them. And you think about how many people suffered, how many economies, how many nations have been devastated, have never recovered, small businesses that haven't recovered, and so on and so on. And this little man, he is Dr. Evil.
The times I've gotten COVID and was sick in bed, just couldn't sleep, just aching, nauseous, couldn't swallow saliva because I was so sick.
And they created this.
That's what's going through my head is that I know the names of the people. There were individuals who decided that we are going to create this virus.
Wow.
And Fauci and Peter Daszak and Ralph Baric, and they're all part of that. There's a handful of people.
Did they get pardoned too, Ralph Baric and Peter Daszak?
No.
So they
Peter
haven't been
Daszak
pardoned.
just got defunded and blacklisted for 5 years from receiving federal funding.
Enough.
He just started a new organization that just launched a new journal that Springer, one of the big scientific public publishers, is now promoting and putting out Peter Daszak's new journal that he is the editor of.
And, I would encourage people to look at Dr. David Martin, right? He's pretty good on this. Do you know him?
Yeah.
David Martin has been outspoken about this from the beginning. And also Mickey Willis, who did Plandemic 1, 2, and 3. Yeah. Mickey, I think Plandemic 2 is with David Martin, actually. That's another place if people are interested in really understanding this, they can go and watch that. Explain the link to me, because one of the things I didn't know from listening to your testimony and then starting to research this is I didn't understand the link to fetal tissue, human fetal tissue, and animal experiments.
Yeah, back in 2018, the Center for Medical Progress, David Dalladin and the Center for Medical Progress did an investigation about the trafficking of fetal tissue, which is basically organs and parts of aborted fetuses that are used in lab experimentation. That was 2018. We started, that kind of piqued our interest when we heard the investigation. It was just grotesque. So we're like, let's see what type of federal funding is involved in this. And when we started to look into what that fetal tissue from Planned Parenthood and stuff was being used for, it turns out that 90% of the experiments that were using this fetal tissue involved animals. And in those experiments, they were taking, and still are, scalps from aborted fetuses and implanting them onto mice's backs, fingers from aborted fetuses that they were implanting into mice. And there's photos in these papers that we uncovered where you see the outline of a tiny, tiny fetal finger protruding out of the back of a mouse. And then they have something called the BLT mouse model, not the BLT that people are used to hearing about. This is bone, liver, and thymus tissue that they take from aborted fetuses and put into mice to give them humanized immune systems and then infect them with HIV and other viruses. And
so you're trying to turn the animal into a human
in some case, yeah,
in some respects, so that the experiment itself
is maybe more relevant to humans. Except you still, at the end of the day, have a mouse that has a fetal, a human scalp or a human finger or a human bone marrow or something. It's still not a human, but yeah. So there's a whole industry built around procuring fetal tissue, and you can't technically sell it, but there's a business built around procuring the tissue from the abortion clinics and then providing it to laboratories. And the laboratories can pay the companies to get the tissue. They can't technically pay for the tissue, but they pay for the fees associated with getting it. So there's businesses built around just providing this.
How much is that worth?
I mean, we're talking many millions of dollars. And then there's like University of California, San Francisco, for example, has a clinic where they perform abortions. And then they also have animal experimenters at UCSF who use tissue in the experiments that they're being funded by the NIH for. So, there's definitely, there's connections between these industries. And they all exist because of one another. And a lot of it exists because of taxpayer funding. It's the same thing, the kind of theme we've been talking about is if the funding is there, people are going to find a way to use it.
So when you have a ruling from the Supreme Court like Roe v. Wade, and you essentially have a reduction in the number of abortions going on, does that impact their business model? Because of the supply is less?
Ideally, yes. That it's going to be harder, but the problem is, we've seen this with monkeys and stuff during China with COVID, because China, a lot of the monkeys in U.S. labs are exported from China, monkey farms in China to the U.S. So then they keep using them, but the price becomes exorbitant. Monkeys cost $25,000, $30,000 all of a sudden for a single monkey. But the first Trump administration, as a result of that investigation, started to crack down on fetal tissue, restricting funding for it, cutting off completely ending some projects, cutting off funding for future projects. Biden, of course, early 2021, turned the spigot back on, started funding that stuff again. So there are still grants out there right now where they are being funded by the NIH to do these animal experiments with implanting human fetal tissue into lab animals. And this won't surprise you or anybody else after listening to this, the single largest funder of human fetal tissue experiments on animals, Anthony Fauci's division of the NIH.
My word.
It all comes back to him in a lot of ways. He's the poster child, for animal experimentation. He's behind some of the worst abuses in the history of lab animals. He either conducted them himself with his own hands, or provided the funding for it, or signed off on it, or championed it in some other way. And his fingerprints are still all over the National Institutes of Health. His legacy is alive and well there, unfortunately.
In this dark world that you have inhabited for a very long time, what are the worst abuses?
That's a great question. Primate experiments always are very upsetting to me because these animals are so long-living. Some of them spend decades, 30, 40 years. Some of them have spent in laboratories in a tiny cage the size of a jail cell that they can barely turn around in. In some cases, they can't see or touch anybody else. We subject animals in laboratories as routine treatment, equivalent to what we subject the worst violent human abusers for in prison. That's routine treatment of animals who've done nothing wrong. So, when I think about the monkeys at the Yukon lab, I mean, that's always what sticks out to me because they were the ones who really brought me into this issue. They were named after Planet of the Apes characters. which always upsets me that, it's just so flippant. The experimenters think it's cute, and they name these monkeys after Planet of the Apes characters and then torture them. And that's, first of all, that's contradictory to the whole message of Planet of the Apes, first of all. But with these primates being so intelligent and so like us, and then ultimately revolting. But so thinking about those monkeys who are locked in a cage, bleeding from their heads, infected, shaking, ripping their own hair out, spinning around. I mean, 90% of the monkeys in laboratories in the U.S. exhibit some kind of abnormal stereotypical behavior. And it's things you see like people who've been abused, adults and children who've been abused, rocking incessantly, picking, biting themselves, ripping out their own hair, and worse. And this is standard in taxpayer-funded laboratories in this country. And people like Fauci not only fund it, but champion it and want to expand it.
How can you see that every day and have no compassion? How can you walk away from that untouched?
I think some of these people have deluded themselves into that they're doing it for the greater good. But that, obviously, you mentioned Mengele. I mean, there's a lot of people who have done horrible things.
So psychotic and so evil.
Yeah.
Unspeakably evil.
Yeah.
Justin, how do you live with all of this, all the things that you've seen, all the things that you know?
I have a lot of hate in my heart, but I try to channel it into productive energy to make people pay for what they're doing and put them out of business. So I wake up every morning and I'm like, how am I going to spend my time today trying to shut down animal labs and free the survivors? And that's been my whole life for the last 20 years, is fighting for animals who are being tortured and abused and imprisoned through no fault of their own by greedy, heartless people. And I'm being forced to pay for that. So it's not only that it's happening. Yes. It's that we are all being forced to support and endorse
it. The blood, sweat, and tears of every American worker
is keeping these people in business. Without our unwitting support financially.
Well, and knowledge for the most part.
And knowledge, yeah. It happens in secrecy with our money. And when I try to get information, when my co-waste tries to get information, we are told no. We have to constantly sue the government. And
information that, by the way, belongs to you and to me and to every American citizen.
And then all of a sudden we're spending thousands and thousands and thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars fighting the government for access to basic information about how they're spending money
that you have a right to. Do you need money? Obviously every organization needs money. If you want people listening to this to donate to you,
I would be so grateful. Yeah, so White Coat Waste is a nonprofit 501c3 organization. We're a charity. Yeah. We don't have big institutional donors. 80% of our revenue comes from the grassroots. Small dollar donations, $5, $10, $20 from people when they can afford it to support the work we're doing. We have a tiny fraction of the budget of big groups like PETA, who are other groups you've heard about. They have budgets teetering on $100 million, and we have nothing close to that.
And you get attacked.
We get attacked. We get dragged through the mud. People file complaints about us trying to damage the organization because we're attacking the root of the problem. And we're going after very, very powerful interests, institutions, individuals like Dr. Fauci, like the NIH, like the DOD. And we hold everyone accountable. Despite what the mainstream media has said about us, we are equal opportunity. We call balls and strikes. We criticized Trump the first time, and they ended up doing the right thing in a lot of cases. We criticized the Biden administration. And we, again, now, DOD's doing great, VA's doing great, NIH, room for improvement. And we're demanding it. We are a Y10 organization. We have no litmus test. You can eat meat, wear fur, do whatever you want. But as long as you're with us on this one issue, taxpayer-funded animal testing, we are happy to have you, and we will work hand in hand with you. Like I said, Freedom Caucus to the Squad and everybody in between. We really want this movement to grow. People are sick and tired of being paid for this stuff, and the only way it's going to stop is if we could find it through our investigations, expose it through our media campaigns, and then defund it through our lobbying. And the only way we can do that is with people's support. So, I donate to organizations whose mission I support. We, dollar for dollar, are getting way more done than organizations that have 20, 30, 40, 50 times the budget we have. We have shut down more animal laboratories, literally saved more animals, got them into loving homes than any of these groups have in a very long time.
And is anyone else doing what you're doing?
There are no groups doing kind of the soup to nuts approach that we do. We try to expose a lab and get the animals out of that lab into loving homes and do everything in between. We expose the lab, we work, to get the documents through FOIA lawsuits against open records lawsuits, to get videos and photos. I mean, the way we know about a lot of these experiments, the fear experiments with the monkeys being scared with fake snakes and spiders and brain damaged into the NIH, we got those videos through a FOIA lawsuit. The only way most people know about what's going on in laboratories is because we're fighting with these government agencies day in and day out to get access to that information, and then bringing it to Congress and helping them write legislation and pass legislation and uniting strange bedfellows on Capitol Hill to do something about it. And, again, I'm very proud of the work I've been doing over the last 20 years. I'm incredibly proud of White Coat Waste. We do so much with, on a relative shoestring budget.
And you live just on the outskirts of D.C., so you're able to go in there and push these issues on Capitol Hill in person a lot?
Yeah. I as you mentioned, in February I testified in the House Oversight Committee in Nancy Mesa's subcommittee about taxpayer-funded animal experiments. I was the lead witness. And I go to Capitol Hill and I bring rescued lab beagles and we meet with members of Congress and we say, help us save dogs like this. Do you realize that the agency that you have authority over on the Energy and Commerce Committee or the House Armed Services Committee is funding this type of stuff, and you can help us end it.
And do they know? I bet most of the time they have no idea, right?
And I don't blame them. Think about just what you see in the news. I mean, these members of Congress have hundreds of different things that are on their plate that, lots of hair on fire moments they're dealing with every day, high profile issues. I don't blame them that they haven't been able to get around to doing this, but what my job is to help make it a priority for them. Get them in a room and get 5 minutes and say, hey, there's a hearing coming up or there's a vote coming up and we'd love your support on this. And build bridges with congressional staffers, because there are a lot of staffers on the Hill. Even if the members are busy, the Hill is full of young staffers and old staffers, just people who really care about animals. They have office dogs. They're on the Congressional Animal Protection Caucus, but they still don't know a lot of this stuff's going on. So our job is to be the tuba, make a lot of noise, be the squeaky wheel, make sure that people can't avoid this issue.
Does this impact your home life, your family? You have wife and kids?
So I don't have kids, but my wife is kind of in the trenches with me on this. She's a professor, psychology professor, and her research is focused on trauma in dogs and primates rescued from laboratories. So she works at sanctuaries and with rescues to help them understand the type of trauma these animals experience so they can better rehabilitate them and get them into loving homes or get primates into sanctuaries and to get them some healthy habits and healthy living environments. So, we're like a dynamic duo. We've been doing this together for a long time, and that's great because, a lot of the things we discuss, if you describe that to most people, we run as fast as they could in the other direction if their life was going to involve dealing with these things, and especially, having the media come after me.
Yeah, on top of everything else, you get punished for telling the truth and trying to do the right thing.
I mean, my wife's great. I mean, if Washington Post ran a cover story criticizing most people's spouses, they'd say, get another job. And she's like, no, screw these people. You got to fight harder. So, yeah, it's amazing. But, yeah, it's caused me, the last 5 years have been a challenge with members of Congress and the press and other, politically other organizations that have a different political agenda going after us and trying to take us down for criticizing Fauci or questioning the lab leak or beagle testing or whatever it's been. And transgender animal test, another great example, where we did that investigation. There's tons of press, CNN, all the biggest media outlets are writing stories about saying this isn't true. And it's like...
Yeah, it's just crazy.
Yeah, and my wife our politics are the animals, both of us.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, we're going to work with and support whoever is willing to help us fix this problem.
Sure, I get that.
We try to stay laser focused on that. But it's disheartening. It's disheartening sometimes, and it makes her life difficult by extension. And I work too much sometimes and have to be embroiled in controversy once in a while. And, we've been together 24 years, so.
Wow, that's a long time.
Yeah.
Do you believe in God?
I don't believe that God would let this happen.
Have you always felt that way?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Your wife feels the same way?
Yeah. Yeah. My dad's very religious, prays for me every day. Her mom prays for us every day. And, that's fine. People don't believe the same thing I do about animals either. So that's what's great about this country is,
I mean, it is. It's just hard.
And I think you can appreciate this, and obviously you have a different point of view about it. But when I look around this planet and see what's happening, I think that no compassionate and just power would allow these things to happen.
I understand. All my life, I dealt in human tragedy and suffering, and I felt exactly the same way as you. I couldn't. How could you explain away the things that I saw? How could a just or loving God? And for me, everyone has their own journey. For me, my personal journey was that I reached a point where I think it was when I really looked at Satanism. I'd looked at it in the past, but when I really began to look into the cartels and the satanic occult connection and all of this, and you really want to understand when you watch human beings behead another human being, but slowly, limb by limb, keep them alive, pump them full of heroin, stop them going into shock, and they can keep somebody alive for, one Mexican investigator told me 2 weeks is the longest he had seen that. So incredible cruelty, not just to children, but the children really got to me, of course, more than anything. Even human suffering, children separated from their parents, lost in a flood, or poverty. That was so painful for me, just tore my heart out. So, but when I really looked into the face of evil, and I tried to understand it, and it was explained to me in terms of really the dividing line between God and Satan is free will.
Yeah.
And when I said that principles just are absolute, you know what I mean? It's like if God says, okay, you've got free will, but only as long as you make these decisions, because these are the ones that are good.
Yeah.
And it doesn't quite, I still say to myself, because I deal with these stories, especially in trafficking. I was gang raped for 40 or so minutes and sodomized and beaten, but I deal with people who are raped for years.
Yeah.
Children who are raped for years until they die. Babies who are raped from birth, who are starved, suffocated sexually. And you look at this and you imagine being that child crying out to God, and he doesn't come because you die there.
Yeah.
And that person, that evil comes to you time and time and time again. How can there be a God? And I can't tell you, I can't answer that for you. I can't. You know what I mean? Nobody can lead to, it's just that once I understood, I just knew, and I just felt it.
Yeah.
And I just knew.
Yeah.
And I saw that. I can't explain all of that. And I can't imagine what it'd be like. And when I think about animals, it just breaks me.
Yeah.
It just breaks me.
Yeah.
But, I'm not preaching.
No.
I'm just sharing for you all my life. And then I started to think about, why did you keep me alive through all the things I've survived? Because I've survived a lot more than Egypt.
Yeah.
And then I just sort of, the pieces just fit together, and I realized that there was a lot of things I would never be able to explain, and I understand why people don't believe. But it just, once you see it, it's just so clear, and it's so powerful that I don't know, I never went back.
Yeah.
I never went back.
Yeah, I try to live by the golden rule, whether or not I believe in God. I was brought up that way to just, and it extends obviously beyond humans for me too. But yeah, I just try to live a just life and be a good person and treat
do the
other
right
people
thing for the right reason.
Yeah, and try to treat other people and animals the way I'd want to be treated, and hope good things come to me in life. And
well, I am so grateful to you. I mean, if you were not doing this work, you and all the people that you work with, your teams, all the sacrifices you and your wife have made, I mean, my good Lord, I just can't believe I've gone this long in my life without paying attention to this, because it's not hard to find. I mean, thanks to people, especially thanks to you and your organization, people can learn about this themselves. And honestly, even the medical establishment, Department of Defense, they don't even hide it because it's been condoned for so long. So it's really crazy. I mean, the journalists, so the Sicilian in me wants to say, just line them up against the wall and get rid of them.
Yeah.
But I can't say that. And I don't mean that.
Yeah.
I don't mean that.
Yeah.
I don't mean that. I know.
Yeah.
I have a friend who always says to me, you got to ask, what would Jesus do? And I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, so that's not what Jesus would do. He would not line them up against the wall and shoot everybody. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. So we'll start there. That's not the answer. And then for me, if I can get a measure of peace, it just comes from knowing that my job is not vengeance. My job is not revenge. Vengeance is mine, said the Lord. So I can give that over to God. I know you can't do that, but I can give that part over to God. And I just know what my job is, that I need people to know, because I just truly and utterly believe that when people know, enough of them do the right thing.
Yeah, thank you. And you've been a supporter of ours since 2021. We did a Fox interview together about how horrible Fauci's Beagle tests were, and I remember it so vividly. You came on camera, and you had a dog sitting in your lap.
I think it might have been this one.
Maybe.
I think it might have been, hey, studio dog, wake up, you've had enough of a nap. Studio dog, let's see you. Honey, just studio dog. I mean, you're so lucky you're not a lab dog.
I think my job in general is to create, we're trying to create a climate where this type of thing is stigmatized and society does not accept it. And that not only means cutting the funding for it, but it means creating a culture where if you tell someone this is what you do for a living, you're going to be ostracized.
Yes.
That you're not going to be invited to dinner parties anymore.
Or given awards.
Yeah, you're not going to be
rewarded with a big salary.
Yes, you're not going to get promoted and celebrated and put in the USDA Hall of Fame for doing kitten cannibalism experiments with wet market meat from China. I mean, that's where we are now. And it's changing. Public hearts and minds are changing. We just need policy and the government to catch up, and we're getting there.
Can we just end on this? Can we agree on one thing? Can we agree that we don't live forever? I've lost my mother. I've lost my father. I've lost other people that I love and care about. So but we're all going to die at some point. And yes, I was very grateful when I had cancer that I could get treatment and I could survive it. But do we not know enough at this point about enough things that kill people that we can sacrifice whatever knowledge somebody might argue is gained through animal experimentation? Can we not just agree that it's not worth it?
I agree with you 100%, and I do you one better, that actually there's a better chance that we'll be saving more people if we stop wasting billions of dollars and decades of time on dead-end animal experiments, that we're going to come to cures more quickly. And there's going to be more of them because the resources and attentions are going to be focused in the right place.
Well, thank you so much, Justin. We're going to stay with you. We are going to come back and follow up on all of these things. I'm going to hit the phones. I'm a journalist, not an activist, but you know what? I feel like almost like I want to be an assassin.
Yeah.
Okay, but fortunately, I'm not good at any of that. So, but I am good at my own form of torturing people. I'm going to make a few calls and see who I can get to help me and try to get some attention on this so that people can do the right thing. But I just, I want to thank you for being here, taking the time to come down and be with us. You're good at what you do. I mean, you're really good. You're meticulous and you're very grounded and reasonable and honest, and everything is evidence-based. I've looked long and hard at White Coat Waste. Amazing work that you do. And I know I can't curse anybody. I can't wish bad on anybody because that's bad karma. So I just got to say, I got to let that part go. I got to let that part go and trust that my mother used to say, everybody pays the piper in the end. Nobody gets off scot-free. And I tell my kids that when they're like really mad that somebody seems to have gotten away with something terrible. Yeah. I just tell them everybody pays the piper. So let's hope that we can do something really meaningful here by bringing this to people's attention. I'm really going to do my best. And I can only say to you, it's obvious, you got to like, you got to share, you have to subscribe. Don't turn away. Don't put this down and walk away from listening to this and go back to your life and say, wow, that's terrible, but there's nothing I could do about it. There's something you can do about it. You can educate yourself. You can speak up. You can support Justin Goodman here and White Coat Waste. I know you're on X.
Yeah,
you're probably on all social media, right?
Yeah, at White Coat Waste on any social media platform.
Okay.
And me personally, and I talk a lot of shit all day about animal experimenters on X, at Justin R. Goodman.
Your personal one. I just followed I found your personal one.
I get a lot of enjoyment from that. It gives me some, a chance to bring some levity to some of these things, but also kind of mouth off about how I'm feeling about something, even if it's not the organization's official position in our media statement at the time.
Right.
And there's stuff I'll share too. But we appreciate the support. I'm so grateful for your support over the years and proud to have you on the team. I've really respected you as a journalist for a very, very long time. And just am thrilled to be here and have you amplifying our message and using your platform to get the word out about what we're doing. Everybody has a stake in this. Everyone who pays their taxes, even if they don't, but everyone who's paying their taxes has a dog in, well, that's not a dog in the fight is not the analogy you want. Yeah,
but what you're saying is
skin in the game. We all have skin in the game here.
And even kids, and anyone who cares about animals and anyone who also is going to grow up to be a taxpayer, right? Or if you're retired and you're not earning anymore, nobody wants this.
No, we're worried about national debt. We're worried about health care. Worrying about, $20 billion a year is a lot of money that could be spent
on other things.
On other things instead of torturing puppies and kittens and monkeys and bunnies in dead-end experiments. And that's what's happening now. Fortunately, that's changing too slowly for me.
But
this is the moment. The Trump administration has a different point of view on big government and science, and they don't have that blind reverence for authority that, certainly the Biden administration and most administrations of the past have had. They're willing to shake things up and slash and burn at these agencies. And they should start. Something everyone will support, left, right, and center, is saving animals from government abuse. So regardless of what people think about their administration, about other issues, this is an area where they've shown great leadership on last time they were in the White House and this time, and they have the political will to do what you want. If you told me, we talked about the executive order under any other administration, I would have laughed it off and thought that's never going to happen. I wouldn't put it's not beyond the pale now.
No.
Because Trump's entire family cares about this.
Trump's going to watch this interview. I just know it.
The first family, Don Jr., Eric,
they're going to
Lara,
watch this.
They are all supporters of ours. They've all been great on this issue. J.D. Vance has supported our stuff when he was in Congress. Rogers, everyone, all of these, folks.
You're giving me a list.
These are all people who've been supporters of ours since day one, since the last administration, who want to see this happen. I was just talking to a friend of Lara Trump's who's like, we need to get beagles out of labs. What do we need to do that?
I'm with you.
This is a priority for them right now, and we can't miss the moment. So yes, share, follow us on social media. If you can, donate. But yeah, just sharing to amplify this stuff to make sure that's how the algorithm works, as many people see it as possible. The White House is paying attention.
What if people want to do an event for you and have you come and speak? Can they reach you to do that?
Yeah, contact me, DM me on X.
Maybe we can do a big event nationally where I can interview you on stage and people can ask questions and we can put some light on this.
I would happily do that.
Okay,
I go wherever and whenever someone wants me to speak and hear about what we're doing. I'm happy to do it.
You don't feel it and you don't see it, but when I look at you, I see the light and the hand of God. I do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. So hopefully this will light a fire under you and motivate you to do something, do anything, even just speaking up and calling your congressman, calling your senators, calling, just not accepting that this is a fact and feature of life, because it doesn't have to be. Okay, I'm Lara Logan. Thank you so much for watching Going Rogue with Lara Logan. It was tough going rogue on this one, but we need every single one of you. So Justin Goodman, White Coat Waste, at White Coat Waste, look him up. Thank you so much for watching.